Yeah, we'll be starting in about 30 seconds. 30 seconds. 20. Okay, Steve, the Word of God is alive and powerful.
And sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing, dividing asunder of the soul and the spirit, and the joints and the marrow, and is a critic of the thoughts and intents of the heart.
All Scripture is God-breathed.
And is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be mature, thoroughly furnished unto all good works.
Study to show yourself approved unto God.
A workman that needeth not to be ashamed,
rightly dividing the word of truth. And we always say that the spiritual spin stops right here because we really care for you. Go ahead and pray for us, Steve.
Thank you, Father, for the opportunity to study your word. We ask your blessing on all that's taught here tonight, and may it have a ripple effect throughout time in your kingdom.
America's cornerstone that has changed. It was Arkansas Rally. Yeah, I did. Arkansas Rally for the Constitution, and they've changed it to America's Cornerstone Celebration Picnic for Constitution Day. That week of September the 15th is, in fact, Constitution Week. And the Constitution of the United States has been such a fantastic document to guide us through all these years. And we've gotten away from that. And interestingly enough, there is a law that indicates that any public institution that's receiving money from the federal government is required during that week to give a class on the Constitution. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm going to make sure that our school systems know that here, and I want to find out why they're not doing it. Yeah. Basically, is what I'd like to know. Mm-hmm. But anyway, as you scroll down through here, and I've been privileged to be asked to be a speaker at this, you can read about the conference itself, and notice that Jan Morgan, who just ran for governor, she didn't win, but she ran for governor, and she's going to speak on America's Cornerstone, which is the Constitution. And then a man by the name of Randy Alexander, and I'm not sure who that is. I think this may be the guy that is the legislator from up northwest Arkansas. You can check that on Facebook. But nevertheless, just want to call your attention to it, and I would ask those of you that are locally to consider coming to that rally. We need people to stand up, and let's get back to what made this country great. Okay, let's begin now in 2 Timothy. And I want to say to you that tonight's lesson will probably take the full hour. I'm not sure whether we'll finish it or not. If not, we're going to continue on. But this will be a series of lessons on 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. Now, what I'd like for you to do, those of you that are with me here in the room, I'd like for you to take that document, and what I'd like to do is to have us read that together. This passage is going to come alive to you. So just like back in the old church, the liturgical kind of churches where we read the scripture together, just follow with me and let's do that, okay? Read that with me. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For this sort are they which creep into houses, and lead silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. This passage, I believe, is so important to us this day. So what we're going to do is tonight, we're going to look probably just at verse 1. We're not going to go any further than that because it's going to take about an hour and 15 minutes to get through this. But what this is going to do is it's going to introduce this passage. And then when you begin in verse 2, getting all the way down through verse 6, what you're going to see is what it is that's causing disaster in a country. With that in mind, let's turn to verse 1. 2 Timothy 3:1, and I'm going to give you a translation of this verse based on an exegetical study. I'm not going to bother you with the exegesis, all the grammar, but I will give you a translation based upon that exegetical study. Now, if perhaps there are those out here who say, wait, that's not right, well then let me ask you to do this, challenge me, and I'll take you back to the exegetical study and show you where in fact this is what this verse is telling us. Here's what this says. It says, now be knowing this. And that phrase, now be knowing this, knowing in that word, in that verse, is a command that in the last days of a nation or the last days of a dispensation, in other words, when you look at that phrase can be applied to the last days of a nation as well as the last days of a dispensation. Moving on now. Now be knowing this, a command, hard, perilous times. And these hard, perilous times are in, know this, God said, hard, perilous times are coming. So that when you look out and see reversionism everywhere, if there happens to be any, you realize that when you see disastrous circumstances in your nation, you have a pretty good idea as to what is causing it. So be knowing this, hard, perilous times will be imminent. And that word imminent means they're going to be imminent, they're going to be threatening, they are impending. So if we don't heed the command to do exactly what he wants us to do, then just understand that disaster, threatening times are impending. They are imminent. They're right around the corner. So now be knowing this, hard, perilous times will be imminent, threatening, impending. And that means those phrases mean distress. And here's the issue. Grammatically, the form of grammar in here indicates that this statement is a fact. It is a reality. Be knowing this. Okay, now let's do this. We indicated that in periods of reversionism, you can have either disaster in a nation because the nation is in reversionism, or it might be reversionism in a dispensation of time. You need the history. Look at this. In the age of the Gentiles, so what I have is a dispensation. I have a spiritual condition of that dispensation and the conclusion of that dispensation. Remember, now be knowing this, that hard, perilous times will be imminent if in fact you don't do what God tells you. The age of the Gentiles, the spiritual condition of that flood. You got that? Well, what about the age of Israel? See, the age of Israel is not going to be concluded until the second coming of Christ. So we're jumping over the church age for just a moment. The age of Israel began before the church age, but the church age was interrupted. It's being carried out now. And at the rapture of the church, the last 7 years of the age of Israel will pick up again. When you get to the middle of the tribulation, all heck is going to break loose. The Antichrist is on the scene. We've got war all over the planet. So by the time you get the last 3.5 years, the disaster is in fact the second advent that's disaster to anybody that's on the planet that happens to be an unbeliever, because guess where they go? They go straight to hell. Okay? The church age, coming back to the church age then, the church age, by the time you get to the end of the church age, before the rapture, we will be a reversionistic dispensation. Okay? And the disaster for those that are alive that are not following this command, it will be the rapture will occur, and guess what? They're going right smack dab into the tribulation and will suffer through that 7 years, one way or another. Okay? Now, if they become saved during that period of time, at the second advent, they'll get their resurrection body, and they'll be taken off to heaven. However, they don't. At the second advent, those who came out of the church age and remained unbelievers, they're going straight to hell, to be resurrected at the end of the millennium, to go to the great white throne judgment, and then cast into the lake of fire. Now, the millennium is 1,000 years of reign of Jesus Christ. But when you realize that at the end of the tribulation, or the end of the millennium, for a short season, Satan and all the fallen angels will be loosed from the bottomless pit, and Satan's going to go about the north, east, south, and west, and he's going to pull together all the unbelievers for one final battle with God, and God will dispatch them. They'll go to the great white throne judgment, the people will, and the fallen angels will be cast into the lake of fire. So what we see here then, this passage says, be knowing this, hard and perilous times will be imminent, and that's disaster as a result of reversionism. We've seen every one of these dispensations end that way, by reversionism. And it was cataclysmic for those who were alive at that point in time in reversionism. Now, let's talk about the church age, because that's the period of time in which we live. We're not interested now about the age of the Gentiles, not interested about the age of Israel, nor the millennium. We're interested in the church age. So let's take a look at some information regarding the church age. Understand that there is a right side of history and a wrong side of history upon which Christians stand in the church age. Now, what does that tell you then? What do you take from that particular phrase? Who is standing on the right side of history, and who's standing on the wrong side of history? What it is?
Unbeliever.
Who?
Unbeliever.
Well, hang on.
To be unbelievers or virginistic.
Yeah, but hold on. Yeah, look here.
We must not have the same.
What's the? Yeah, you got it. Just read what's there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see unbelievers in that verse at that point anywhere?
No.
Mm-mm.
What I want you to see is who is standing on the wrong side of history.
Those that are doing the wrong thing.
There. What's that?
Those that are doing the wrong thing.
I can't hear you.
Those that are doing the wrong thing.
Okay, who are those?
Unbelievers. And it could.
Church age. Believers.
See, that's the point. That's the
Church
point.
age.
We're not interested at this point in time about unbelievers.
Okay.
We're not talking about unbeliever reversionism,
Mm-hmm.
because unbelievers can in fact be, without being saved, they can be in reversionism. But what causes their reversionism? They're not following the 5 laws of divine establishment. So when an unbeliever is untrue to freedom, untrue to marriage,
Mm-hmm.
untrue to family, untrue to nationalism, free market capitalism, unfriendly to employment,
Mm-hmm.
seeking a government handout, they too are in reversionism. But point 1 is not talking to you about unbelievers. This says there is a right side of history upon which Christians stand. There is a wrong side of history upon which Christians stand. You get that? So what we want you to realize is that when you find out what the spiritual way of life is, when you can make a distinction between a religious life and an experientially spiritual life, you're going to see a dichotomy there. On one side, we've got people that are doing the right thing in the right way, stand on the wrong side of history.
Yes.
Okay, that's what you need to realize. So that when you're out here now looking at a spiritual battle called the angelic conflict, see, that's the backdrop. That's the backdrop against which all of human life is lived. I've actually talked to some people here in recent days to try to present the idea that the United States of America is in fact a theocracy. That blows the minds of many people. Because what they see is a theocracy. They believe that because you're going to call it a theocracy, that God is going to bully you into doing the right thing. The government's going to bully you into doing the right thing. No. See, God permits freedom because that's the key to the resolution of the angelic conflict. So forget this idea about a theocracy then for just a moment. We don't need to go there, but I'm just indicating to you that we need to make a distinction between an experientially spiritual life and a spiritual life. I mean, and a religious life. Let me ask you this question before we move on. When you become a born-again believer, see, terminology is important. When you become a born-again believer, are you a spiritual being? The answer is yes.
Yes, you are a spiritual being. You're not a experiential.
See, that's the point. You are positionally spiritual because you are in Christ. But you're not experientially spiritual.
That's the blue circle.
What's that?
That would be the blue circle on a diagram.
What's that? That's the blue circle for the positionally spiritual guy. So everyone in this room is born again. If you're out here on WebEx, Facebook, YouTube, if you're born again, you're spiritual. But make sure you understand what that means, because you may be spiritual, but a hell raiser in life. You're out on the toolies as far as your lifestyle is concerned, because the Christian way of life doesn't end when you get saved. It's just beginning. So the question now is, how do you get to be on the right side of history? Listen. If you're a born-again Christian, are you standing on the right side of history? Are you on the right side? I closed my eyes and squinted here. Are you on the right side of history just because you're a born-again Christian?
You know, if you're spiritually spiritual at the time, if you're doing the right things in the right way, you could be an unbeliever or not.
Okay, answer the question. Don't add to it now. Hang on. Just because you're a Christian, born-again Christian, are you standing on the right side of history?
Maybe not.
Yes or no?
No.
You're not. That's exactly right. See, don't get wishy-washy.
Why couldn't you be a born-again Christian and living from the Spirit of the Spirit?
You could be, but that wasn't the question.
Yeah.
The question is, can you be a Christian and not be living on the right side of history? The answer is yes.
You didn't word it like that.
What's that?
I don't think you worded it like
Well,
that.
we'll go back and listen to the tape. Okay.
Now
So
I got it.
the point is this.
Got it now.
Okay. See, just because you're a born-again Christian doesn't mean that you're living on the right side of history. You're not living on the right side of history until you become experientially spiritual, and then you have to know what that is. Because we may be talking to people on WebEx, YouTube, Facebook, who don't have a clue what I just said. They don't know what experientially spiritual is. They don't make that distinction. All they know is everybody out here say, hey, you're spiritual, or they got some wild idea about being spiritual simply because they do a lot of good things. That's not it. So when you begin to realize that until a believer becomes experientially spiritual, that person's on the wrong side of history, and this is what this is trying to tell you. You got that?
Right.
This is how serious this is. Okay, now with that in mind. So there is a right side of history and a wrong side of history upon which Christians stand in the church age. So we've made it clear that you can be a born-again Christian and be on the right side of history. You can be a born-again Christian on the wrong side of history. If you're a born-again Christian on the right side of history, what kind of spiritual are you? What's it? Experientially spiritual.
There you go.
And to be an experientially spiritual person, you have to first of all know how to get saved. And that's not by walking an aisle. That's not by being baptized, speaking in tongues. Hold it. I understand. I'm not being critical of anybody who believes that. They're just wrong. So just because you have to know how to become saved, you have to know how to confess sin. It's not dedication, rededication. It's rebound. It's 1 John 1:9. You name the sin. It's too easy. Well, talk to God about that. So you name the sin, And now you're operating now in the sphere of neutrality, and you have to make a decision. Am I going to go back the other way, or am I going to become an experiencing spiritual believer? And if you are, you better know Romans 6:6, Romans 6:11, and 6:13. You better know how to know, reckon, and yield. Know, reckon, and yield. And if you don't know that, or you mess them up, you're still on the wrong side of history. I don't care how good you are. You follow that? Okay, let's go to the next page. Let's talk about the right side of history. What is the right side of history? The right side of history is doing the right thing in the right way. Are we okay there? That's on top of page 2, Steve.
Okay.
On top of page 2. So the right side of history. It's on the back side, huh?
Well, you're still on page one.
We're still on page
With the
one.
bottom page one, yeah.
Bottom of
Oh, really?
page one.
Yeah, ours didn't go that far over.
Okay, well I'm on page 2 on mine. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at is the right side of history, because I've just said Christians standing on the right side of history, Christians standing on the wrong side of history. Well, what is the right side of history? Well, the right side of history is doing the right thing in the right way. Do you understand that if nobody ever heard that statement before, they say, what's this guy talking about? Well, let me ask you this. Let's make sure we understand. If you're doing the right thing, what does that mean, doing the right thing? What's that mean?
From the sphere of the Spirit.
Nope. That's the right way.
Oh.
What is the right? See, words are important. What is doing the right thing? Maybe we need to go back to basics class again.
Taking the doctrine.
What's that?
If you're,
Doing the
if you're
truth.
a believer.
What's that, son?
Doing the truth.
Yeah, that's it. Doing the truth. See, you have to know what the truth is, and then in the circumstances that come along, you're going to make an application of the truth to that circumstance. That's doing the right thing. You have to know when the circumstance comes along, what principle, what promise, what doctrine, what technique, what rule for living applies here. That's the right thing. Now that you know what the right thing is, and that's why someone just mentioned, if you're going to do the right thing, how do you learn what the right thing is?
It's taking doctrine.
You come to Bible class. That's what you're doing. You're learning what to do. That is the right thing. So if you don't know the truth and the circumstance comes along, you have nothing to apply to that situation, and you're going to go back and do what you've habituated from the old man or the old woman, and guess what? You're on the wrong side of history again. See, this is crucial to understanding. And when you understand that, when you look at the TV today, Trump gets on the plane, and the Republicans, they begin to rail right again. Now you know why this is happening. Can you imagine? Look what people do all over the world. France wins the World Cup in soccer, and guess what? They burn Paris down.
Wow.
You know, whoa. Okay, here we go. So doing the right thing is knowing what principle, promise, doctrine, technique, rule for living applies. That's the right thing. What about the right way? What's the right way, Steve?
To the sphere of the Spirit.
There you go, sphere of the Spirit. Now, do you understand there's a difference between right way and right thing? See, we need to understand words.
But they do intertwine, because you can't do the right thing without being in the sphere of the Spirit, right?
Wrong. Hold it. No,
Explain.
well, I'm going to get there. No, see, the issue, it was just stated that you can't do the right thing in the wrong way. And that's not right.
No, that's not what I said. When you're doing the right thing, then you have to be doing in the right way. You have to be doing it.
Now, hold it. Now, that's not what you said. You can do the
That's
right.
what I meant.
Okay. Well, I'm not a mind reader.
If you're doing the right thing, as you were talking about, right thing the right way,
Yes, but here's
it has to be involved with the sphere of the Spirit.
But you can do the right thing and do it in the wrong way.
I understand
See that?
but I wasn't
Okay.
talking about that.
Oh, well, that's the question. Okay. So here's the issue. You do the right thing, and you do the right thing right way. We already talked about what the right thing is, and the right way then is what it is.
Sphere of the Spirit.
Function in the sphere of the Spirit. Okay. What's this? doing the wrong thing in the wrong way. What is that? What's the wrong thing? How do you do the wrong thing?
Not taking in doctrine.
Well, if you don't take in doctrine, you're not going to know what to do.
Not gonna know what to do.
But what does it mean to do when you do the wrong thing? What have you done?
Evil.
Sin. Yeah.
Sin,
Yeah.
evil,
Well,
human good. all
maybe not.
Yeah.
Well, it could
You've
be-
applied the wrong truth.
What's that, son?
You've applied the wrong
Oh,
truth.
there you go.
Yeah.
See what you've done. You may be applying the truth, but you've applied the wrong one. That's the wrong thing.
Okay.
And so here's something else. Not only might it be the wrong truth. Let's suppose you have a distorted understanding of what the truth is. You make an application of a distortion of truth. You've done the wrong thing. This is a serious ball game. Okay, so you've done the wrong thing and you do it in the wrong way. Steve, what's the wrong way?
From the sphere of the flesh.
Sphere of the flesh. There it is. So when you do the wrong thing, you might apply the right thing. A distortion of truth from the sphere of the spirit. So we got two things here: right thing in the wrong way, and wrong thing in the wrong way. Do you understand? Again, you can do the right thing and do it in the wrong way. That's what religion does. Religion does the right thing, but they do it in the wrong way. That's why in the angelic conflict, if you're going to stand on the right side of history, in the Christian way of life, in the church age, you had better understand salvation, rebound, or better still, I call it Operation Recovery, but you know that Operation Recovery means rebound and Operation Cry combined. Now you're in the sphere of the Spirit, you're on the right side of history, and you can, let me ask you this. Once you get in the sphere of the Spirit, once you are in an experientially spiritual life, can you get out of that experientially spiritual life?
Yeah.
Just a decision.
Unfortunately.
Was that?
Unfortunately, we can't.
Yeah, unfortunately we can. Okay, now let's move on to point 2. And by the way, listen, I'm not railing. I want to make sure that you understand how important words are. Reversionism is related to standing on the wrong side of history. You understand that? Reversion. So what happens is, if you are in reversionism, what side of history are you standing on?
Wrong.
Wrong side. And why are you standing on the wrong side? It's because you're not doing the right thing in the right way.
Like Brian said, they're not applying the right truth.
That's exactly right. So reversionism is related to standing on the wrong side of history. Now notice here again, this is introducing verses 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. And did you read those 7 verses with me? By the time you get to verse 2, you're going to realize in 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7 exactly what he's talking about here when you're doing the wrong thing and doing it the wrong way. And when that happens, guess what you can expect? The D word.
Discipline.
Discipline. How about
Destruction.
DISAS? Disaster. Exactly right. Why? Because everything we do is related to the AC, the angelic conflict. Okay, how about point 3? Let's see some characteristics of standing on the wrong side of history. The wrong side of history, again, is doing the wrong thing in the wrong way. The wrong side of history is doing the right thing the wrong way. See, that's just a duplication of what we said up there before. So, wrong side of history, doing the wrong thing in the wrong way. Question, what's the wrong way? From the sphere of the what?
Flesh.
Flesh, that's exactly right. What is the wrong thing?
Not applying the right truth.
That's it, not doing the right truth. Or trying to apply a distorted truth. Very good. Okay? Now, the second thing that was the wrong side of history is doing the right thing in the wrong way. So that's applying a truth to the circumstance, but doing it in the sphere of the flesh. Let me ask you this. Just with what we've just said so far here, if you were to make an application, knowing that reversionism results and brings disaster, what would you say then about this generation of Americans, would you call them experientially spiritual? Would you say they're doing the right thing in the right way? The majority?
Majority.
No.
No.
Can you begin to see now why the disasters? And it's not always a proliferation, one disaster proliferating all over the country, but you got one over here, one over here, one over here, one over here, one over there. And what you need to do is to be able to interpret these things correctly. Okay? Now, to understand reversionism, point 4, to understand reversionism is to understand the modus vivendi of the wrong side of history. Now, here again, this is point 4.
We don't have a point 4.
What's that?
We don't have a point 4.
We don't have a point 4.
You don't have a point 4.
Point 3 says to understand reversionism and to understand the modus vivendi of the wrong.
Well, that's
side of
that on mine. That's point 4. I don't know.
history. Okay, our 3 is.
I don't know what kind of notes I gave you.
Ours is 3, but that's okay. Go ahead.
So is it number 3 on your page?
Yes, sir.
Okay, here it is now. To understand reversionism is to understand the modus vivendi of the wrong side of history. Now, you know what the wrong side of history is. It's doing the right thing in the wrong way or the wrong thing in the wrong way. So to understand that, then you must understand the modus vivendi of the wrong side of history. Now, what we need to do is, what does this word mean? There are 2 words that you need to realize, you need to come to grips with. Modus operandi and modus vivendi. Say those with me. The first one, modus what? Operandi. And the second one is what? Modus vivendi. Okay, now look here. What is the modus operandi? See, that's a method of operation. Modus operandi means method of operation. Modus vivendi is a Latin term that means method of living. So the question is, how are you operating and how are you living? So we're saying here, if you're going to understand what reversionism is, then you must understand the modus vivendi, the lifestyle of the wrong side of history. Let's look at modus operandi. This is the method by which a person operates. There are 2 ways to operate. What are they? Sphere of the flesh and sphere of the spirit. So my question to you out on Facebook, you on WebEx, you on YouTube, my question is, how are you operating? Are you operating in the sphere of the spirit or are you operating in the sphere of the flesh? You have 2 options, and the only other option, there is a third option, and what is that?
Neutrality.
The sphere of neutrality. But you're not going to be there very long. That's when you become, the sphere of neutrality is entered when you become objective to consider what your options are. And as soon as you've considered what your option is, you are either in the sphere of the flesh or the sphere of the spirit, one or the other. So you don't stay in the sphere of neutrality very long, just long enough to be objective to evaluate. Now, modus operandi then, you're either in the sphere of the spirit or the sphere of the flesh. Modus vivendi. What is that? That's your method of living. Now that we know you're operating in the flesh, you're operating in the spirit, the question is, what kind of lifestyle do you have? The modus vivendi, the method of living, is either an old man or an old woman lifestyle, which means you're committing personal sin, you're functioning in human good, or you're functioning in evil. Those are 3 separate terms. If you're sinning, if you're committing personal sins, that means you're violating the Word of God. If you're functioning with human good, that means you're doing good things, but you're doing it in the sphere of the flesh. If you're functioning in evil, evil is both a principle and a practice. Listen to me. Evil is both a principle and a practice. What is the definition of evil?
Any distortion of truth, no matter how slight the distortion.
There you go. You said that? Say that again, Steve.
Any distortion of truth, no matter how slight the distortion.
Absolutely. It's a distortion of truth, no matter how slight the distortion. Now, with that in mind, then, do you understand that that's the principle? What is the practice of evil then? What is the so evil is the distortion of truth? What's the practice of evil?
The sin or the human good are doing.
No, you've got too many words.
An overt act.
Okay, yeah, but hold on, you got too many words. Notice, sin and evil and human good are not synonymous. These are three separate terms. Personal sin's a violation of God's will. Human good is doing good, relatively, doing good in the sphere of the flesh. That's human good. Evil is any distortion of truth. That's the principle. What is the practice of evil?
Operating out of the spirit of the flesh.
Well, it would be.
Doing evil.
What is it, son?
Doing evil.
Okay, doing evil, that's it. See, that's the practice of evil. So, in other words, what happens, for example, let's use an illustration. If, in fact, you believe that tithing is spiritual giving, is that truth or is that evil?
Evil.
Help me now.
It's wrong. Distortion of truth is evil.
It's a distortion of truth. So that's evil. How do you practice evil with that truth? With that
By tithing.
by tithing.
Yeah.
The offering plate comes along, you put a tithe in the offering plate. You have evil as a principle and evil as a practice. If I believe, for example, that salvation comes by believing in Jesus and being baptized, is that truth or is that evil?
Evil.
That's a distortion of truth. So how do you practice that evil?
You believe that and you get baptized thinking that's how you're saved.
That's exactly right. You believe in Jesus and then follow through with the baptism, believing that the combination saves you. So there is a principle of evil and a practice of evil. Excuse me. Do you understand that we have just made three distinctions? Sin, human good, and evil are not synonymous. So evil is not murder. Evil isn't rape. Evil isn't getting drunk. Evil isn't slapping your wife. Evil isn't taking the name of the Lord in vain. Those are sinful things. Evil is a distortion of truth. Make a distinction between the three. Are we okay there? Honey, are we okay? Yeah? Okay, so we've got the modus operandi. That's the method of the way a person operates, either in the sphere of the flesh or the sphere of the spirit. Your modus vivendi, that's your method of living, is either old man lifestyle or old woman lifestyle, and that is functioning in personal sin, human good or evil. However, the alternative to that is the old man or new woman lifestyle. New man, new woman lifestyle. And what is that? That's divine good production, doing the right thing in the right way. Are we okay here? Now, here's what that verse says. This know also. That's from the King James Version. This is a command. And it's a command to whom? Every born again believer. So, Marshall, is that a command to you?
Yes.
How about you? Yeah, sure. Is it a command to the folks that are online with me out here? On Facebook, WebEx, YouTube? Absolutely it is. So this is a command. This know also. Now what that means, there's something you're going to have to know. Guess what that is? We're not going to do this tonight, but let me tell you what it is you have to know. You have to know everything that he's going to state and going to categorize in verses 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's what you have to know. Because if you don't know that and you mispractice these things, guess what? You are on the wrong side of history, and then when the disaster comes, you're part of the problem. We okay? So this command is given to every born-again Christian, and this word, this know also, it means to know. It means there's something you need to learn. That means there's something you need to understand. That means there's something here that you need to comprehend. This know also, a command. Now what it amounts to is this. If you're going to know something, metabolizing doctrine is the means of fulfilling this command. You can't know anything if you're not metabolizing the truth. Are we okay there? Okay, so this phrase, this know also. Yeah, it's if you want to or if you don't want to. Is that what it says? What is it? It's a command. Now I want to ask you a question. Do you think that ought to be taken seriously?
Yes.
You understand that if you don't do this, if we don't, now by the way, those up there on Facebook right now, those on YouTube, those on web, that's what you're doing. You're fulfilling this command. You're learning. You've come to know something. You want to know something. You want to learn. You want to understand. You want to comprehend what this life is really all about. And you know, when you begin to think in terms of how long life is, when you compare how long your life is with all of eternity out there, do you realize that if the Razorbacks don't win the next game, do you realize that if you don't hit the jackpot, you realize if you get the idea?
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever. This life is so short, why are we wasting it? I don't know how many, until you learn this, you look back and you want to cry because of the hours, the weeks, the months, the years that are wasted, but really not wasted because during that period of time, God gets your attention. You're just not getting it. Sometimes you go out on Facebook and someone says, what do you do? He says, I'm going to the school of hard knocks. Now, that's where most of us are anyway. That's where we've been. Okay. Now, this know also, it's a command. It's a command to every born-again Christian. And what we want to do now is take, you okay, Marshall? Okay, we're going to change the tape over here. I'm going to personalize this truth. What is the truth? This know also means know something. So let's personalize that. There comes a point in time in your spiritual growth when you must become an interpreter of history. Stop right on just what I said. So we're going to personalize knowing this. See what happens. What are we talking about? The R word. Reversionism. And if you're in reversionism, what side of history are you standing on?
Wrong.
Do you understand you had better be able to interpret history to know what side you're standing on? His integrity is dealing with people all over this planet, all over the United States of America. So there comes a point in time in your spiritual growth, babyhood, adolescence, spiritual self-esteem, spiritual autonomy, spiritual maturity, somewhere along that line, you're going to have to get to the point of asking yourself, do I really understand what's going on here? And when you take a look at what's happening in this country, we have drifted from the Bible and we have drifted from the Constitution. And on September 15th, my message down there in the park in Little Rock is going to be understanding that the Bible and the Constitution are organically connected. And I will guarantee you there'll be people there that are going to say, wait a minute, no, that's not right. Because they're going to be, this won't be among the patriots, but who knows who else is going to be there raising all kinds of questions and fussing maybe. So there comes a point in time in your Christian life right out there on Facebook, right here on YouTube, right here on WebEx. There comes a time in your life when you had better learn to interpret contemporary history. Okay, let's move on from there for just a moment. If you don't become an interpreter of history, if you can't interpret what's going on in history, See, what you're going to ask is, well, why is this happening? What happened? Why did this happen over here? Why did it happen over here? How come it didn't happen over there, but it's happening over here? You have to learn to interpret history. And if you don't, guess what you're going to do? Oh, goodness gracious. Get this, please. You will react against historical trends. Now, what do you mean by historical trend? A historical trend means the way things are going. Do you understand now that for over about 150 years, we were at one time, a nation was beginning to understand something about dispensations, so that you can interpret history correctly dispensationally. Because we don't go back to the Old Testament and pull stuff out of there and try to interpret history here. So the point here is, if you don't become an interpreter of history, here's what's going to happen. You see this wild and woolly thing that's happening today. Whoa. Okay. So we see Antifa. You see something happen over here. You see the Muslims doing something over here. You see somebody else doing over here. See white people railing against blacks. Blacks railing against whites. And you see that, and it just disgusts you. Oh, really? Oh, really? If you don't become an interpreter of history, if you don't understand what's happening, why it's happening, and remember this, no matter what the circumstance of your life, what did Paul say while he was in jail? He finds himself content in every circumstance of life. So do you understand that when you see the historical trend, you might become frightened, you may become anxious, you may become worried. And ask yourself, who's in charge? Who's in charge? God is. He's in control of the circumstances. And what you've done is allowed your negative volition to react to that situation. God's in control. He's already provided everything you need. So what happens is, when you react as a Christian, you're standing where? Look at it. You are on the wrong side of history. If you don't become an interpreter of history, you will react against wrong historical trends, and your reaction will lead you into reversionism. Now, notice the little thing I've got there on the screen. Over here, you have a wrong trend of history. Hey, we're going in the wrong direction. How about this? Do you think if we drift away from the Constitution of the United States, do you think if we drift away from the Bible in the United States, that's a trend that we want? Is that what you want?
No.
Do you think there's anybody in this country that wants us to drift away from the Constitution? Anybody that wants us to drift away from the Bible? You'd better understand what's going on. And when you see that trend, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to react or you're going to respond. And if you react, worry, gripe, complain, bellyache, whatever, become anxious, worried, guess what? You have just done what? What's the R word? You just done what? You've reacted. And what side of history are you standing on? Thank you very much. You're on the wrong side of history. And as a result of that, what's your spiritual status at that point in time? The R word? You're in reversionism. And because you're in reversionism, guess what that's going to do to the country? It's just a matter of time till disaster hits. Right. You have that? So let's take a look at two R words. First of all, responding. The second one is reacting. So when you find yourself in a set of circumstances, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to respond or react. Responding is with doctrinal application to wrong historical trends. So responding with a doctrinal application to wrong historical trends is the experientially spiritual function of the new man or the new woman. You have that? You understand that? We're reacting with a human viewpoint application. When you react with a human viewpoint application, see, that's what man thinks. This is the way we ought to do it. Well, when you react with a human viewpoint application to a wrong historical trend, that's a reversionistic function, and it's the function of what? The old man or the old woman. So I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think you should respond or react to wrong historical trends? You respond. Now, when you respond, are you going to be anxious, frustrated, worried? No. Just remember who's in control. Okay, point 3. Is the next one point 3 for you on your notes?
Yes,
Okay. The royal family. Who's the royal family of God, by the way? Who is that? Born again believers. Are you part of the royal family? Absolutely, if you're born again. The royal family of God must produce the action of knowing. See, who is it? He says, knowing this. Okay, well, who's it supposed to be knowing? That's the royal family. That's you and me. The royal family of God must produce the action of knowing, and without knowing, you as a believer will become reversionistic. Why? Because you know what you're going to do? You're going to apply an habituated piece of information, human viewpoint, and in the angelic conflict, that's contrary to the plan of God. Now, the word this, that's the next word. Knowing this places special emphasis on the importance of interpreting contemporary history. In other words, knowing this. Well, what is this? It's history out here. Watching the historical trends. Historical trends can be going the wrong way. Historical trends can be going the right way. And I'm going to suggest to you again, Ezra 9:8. We have a short space to get this thing right. So that for those of you on line with me tonight, in this room, each one of us have a responsibility before God. And that's to get this thing right. Because here's the issue. We haven't talked about this in quite a while, but we'll finally get to it one day down the road. You, on the right side of history, are a part of the pivot. And what you're going to realize is you are the hub around which all of Christianity functions in this country. So if you're standing on the right side of history, if you are living an experientially spiritual life, you are a part of that pivot. And God's looking at the size of that pivot and saying, okay, I tell you what, he doesn't tell us, but he has a measuring stick. And he says, as long as this pivot stays within a certain margin, he said, disaster is going to come, but you won't be a part of it. You won't be affected by this. In other words, it's not going to hurt you.
It'd be like a ratio of people.
Yeah, yes.
Kind of like Sodom and Gomorrah when they...
Absolutely. So what God's doing is measuring. He's measuring your life, my life, our lives, and he's counting them up. Yeah, there's enough. We don't need to destroy the nation just yet. And then what happens is the pivot can either grow and strengthen that, or it's going to continue to diminish. And I will guarantee you, under pressure in this country, as the pressure increases, you're going to see many people fleeing from the pivot. Why? Because they don't want to open their mouth. Are we okay? So this places special emphasis on the importance of interpreting contemporary history. This equals contemporary history correctly. Interpreting. This means, knowing this. That means interpreting contemporary history correctly. So what happens is, when you take a look at the news, on the news today, when you look at what's going on in the United States today, when you see what's going on in the Philippines, you see what's going on in Russia, see what's going on in Germany and France and everywhere. Once you take a look at that, you have to interpret that. What's going on? So I have a question. And the question is this. Can you interpret contemporary history correctly? See, every born-again Christian needs to be able to do that. Because if you don't know this and you're not interpreting it, where do you stand? On the wrong side of history. And when you're on the wrong side of history, guess what happens? Disaster comes. Knowing this. Point number 1. only the believer with doctrine in his or her soul can interpret contemporary historical events correctly. See, without doctrine, you don't know. That's okay, you know. Gay couple getting married, oh, that's okay, you know.
Nothing to measure it against.
Abortions, rampant, you know. My mind is racing with all kinds of ideas. You can think of some of your own, okay? So only the believer with doctrine in his or her soul can interpret contemporary historical events correctly. Secondly, it is imperative. What does that mean? It's imperative.
Super important.
Okay. What is if something is in an imperative mood? What's that mean? If it's in an what's that?
Command.
It's a command.
Yeah,
The imperative mood is a command. So it is imperative that Marshall. No, it's imperative that you as a believer, you. It's imperative, Jim, you. It's imperative that you as a believer interpret history correctly before history destroys you for standing on the wrong side of history. Understand this, that if God destroys this country, and you're standing on the right side of history, you will be protected. You got that? Now that doesn't mean you're going to hurt, not going to hurt. So knowing this, in the last days, the phrase "in the last days" can describe two things. We've talked about that briefly at the beginning. In the last days means it could be the last days of a dispensation, and we've already seen that all 4 dispensations ended in disaster for the people who were there. That is, the people who were in reversionism. But it can also mean the last days of a nation. So if the last days can relate to a nation, could this have an application to the United States? Knowing this, that in the last days. So what happens is you don't know when it's going to come. You don't know when the bomb's going to drop. You don't know when there's going to be a riot here and the progressives take over and we have a centralized government. You've got no more freedom. Your inalienable rights are gone and the government is dealing out privileges to you. You have this privilege and that privilege and this privilege. You can be privileged to do this. But if the government gives you a privilege, what can they do?
Take it.
Just as fast they can take it away. So in the last days of the dispensation, last days of a nation. Now, be mindful that human history is related to what? Resolving the angelic conflict. I'm telling you, none of this makes any sense until you understand that. Because God is taking, we as born-again Christians in the church age, all of us in the church age, and said, if we're going to resolve this conflict, you're either going to be a part of the solution or going to be a part of the problem. I want to be a part of the solution because I want blessed. I want to be able to be an encouragement to the people around me, my family, and everybody else. But by doing that, that doesn't necessarily mean the whole thing's going to survive. You'll survive. So be mindful then that human history is related to resolving the spiritual battle called the angelic conflict. And in verses 2 through 4, you've read them. In verses 2 through 4, we will learn the characteristics of a nation just before it disintegrates and disappears from the pages of human history. Did you hear what I just said there? Verses 2 through 4, we will learn the characteristics of a nation just before it disintegrates and disappears from the pages of human history. What's it going to do? Those characteristics are the characteristics of a people who are standing where? On the wrong side of history. Now, I'm on page 4, the top of page 4. If you will, just go back to page 1 for just a moment. Go back to page 1. Here it is. What are the characteristics of reversionism? For men, that's male and female people. For men shall be lovers of their own selves. It's all about me. Covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. Those are the characteristics of a reversionistic nation. Okay? Now let's come back here. So keep in mind the characteristics of the United States right now. Just keep in mind. See all those things that in verse 2, 3, and 4? Just take those and make an application to the United States of America. And keep in mind the characteristics of the United States as we approach verses 2 through 4 next week. The fall of every nation is accompanied by the characteristics found in verses 2 through 4. If that's the case, if the fall of every nation is accompanied by the characteristics found in that verse, what are you saying about the United States right now?
Headed for a fall.
Unless we get it right and turn this thing around. And we're not going to turn it around by something that happens in Washington, D.C. It's going to start with you and you and you and you and me. And it's a spiritual thing. So every dispensation terminates with great apostasy. So you see when we look at the Gentiles, the Israel, the church age, and the millennium, every dispensation terminates with great apostasy. That's not a question. That happened. That is going to happen. The Bible is clear about that. Every dispensation terminates with great apostasy characterized by maximum reversionism, influence of evil. Maximum reversionism and the influence of evil refer to standing on the wrong side of history. So two things are true. Maximum reversionism and the influence of evil. And what is evil? Any distortion of truth, no matter how slight the distortion. So what that means is people in a reversionistic nation don't know the truth. So what kind of times are coming? What are they? Perilous times. And that word perilous means difficult, hard. It means any word that denotes a total disintegration of life, a total disintegration of establishment, freedom, marriage, family, nationalism, and employment, a total disintegration of establishment, a total disintegration of law and order. Hello? You hear that? Perilous times mean totally helpless. Perilous times. The word times in this verse refers to a period of time in history characterized by maximum reversionism, the extensive influence of evil, and most people being on the right side of history. That's what a perilous time is. What's that?
You said wrong. You mean wrong time.
Yeah, the wrong side of history. Okay. So the wrong side of history. The word perilous times. Most people being on the wrong side of history. Some points. To be on the wrong side of history means to be totally disoriented to your own life and your own circumstances. Apostasy is a two-sided coin. Apostasy means departure from the truth. I want you to see something. I want you to realize you can depart from the truth and never had it. Because what happens is, for example, an unbeliever is going to have her own idea of what life is all about. You've departed from the truth. See, the real truth you should have, you don't have. You've departed from that. But it also means the apostasy is a two-sided coin. One side is reversionism, and the other side is the influence of evil. You're in reversionism because you don't have the truth. The truth is distorted. Okay? Moving on. So reversionism, my diagram, you got reversionism on one side and evil on the other. They're two sides of the same coin. When a nation is being destroyed, hard times set in. And hard times refers to the total influence of both evil and apostasy. Let me point out something. Prior to 2016, when Donald Trump, this is not Republican or Democrat. It's ideology. It's principle. And what's happened here is that when the nation is destroyed, hard times set in, and hard times refers to the total influence of both evil and apostasy. Do you realize that prior to his election, do you realize where we were economically? Do you realize where we were as far as jobs are concerned? Do you realize how many people were out without jobs? Do you realize how many people are on welfare, etc.? But since that point in time, that short space, things have begun to turn around. But remember, when you step on a nest of rattlesnakes, what do? They rattle and they begin to bite. And that's exactly what's happening today. We got someone stepping on the nest of rattlesnakes. Here it is. Religion is one of the greatest influences in hard times. Notice what I said. What's one of the greatest influences? Religion. Is that good or is that bad? That is bad. So you better understand what religion is. Religion is one of the greatest influences in hard times. Religion is always on the wrong side of history. Religion is the policy of Satan himself. And religion is the devil's ace trump, no pun intended. Religion is the most ingenious device used by Satan. It's used to distract people from the gospel. It's used to distract people from doctrine, and it's used to distract people from God's plan of grace. The next phrase is shall come. And that phrase shall come means it's imminent. And what is imminent? Impending disaster because of reversionism. Impending disaster is a fact that can rightfully be expected to occur. Rightfully be expected to occur. So what happens is if you're standing on the right side of history and you see what's going on and you're interpreting contemporary history correctly, guess what you're going to understand? Disaster is impending. You got that? So impending disaster is a fact that can rightfully be expected to occur under the following conditions of apostasy: reversionism, the influence of evil, and maximum production of human good. You got it all wrapped up in one ball of wax. Reversionism, evil, and human good produce imminent hard times. Hard times are an historical reality where reversionism, evil, and human good exist. So if you've got reversionism, human good, and evil existing, what do you have? HT. Hard times. Concluding principles associated with verse 1. Concluding principles. Number 1. Verse 1 introduces a principle. It introduces a principle of people who are standing on the wrong side of history. Therefore, they're caught up in a whirlpool of historical disaster. We okay there? 2. Only spiritually adult believers, those who are in spiritual self-esteem, spiritual autonomy, or spiritual maturity, only spiritually adult believer can carry their generation. That means if this generation, if this nation is going to last, it's going to depend on you, me, you out here. Born-again Christians who are growing towards spiritual maturity because you make up a part of the pivot. So only spiritually adult believers can carry their generation. What does that mean? Spiritually adult believers are the dam that holds back the water of historical disaster. And I've got a picture of the United States. I've got historical disaster on the other side. I've got a bar between those two, and what's on the other side? What's standing between? What is standing on the gap between historical disaster and the United States destruction? What is it? Look at the picture. What is it? Spiritually adult believers. Is standing in the gap between historical disaster and this nation. There are 4 categories of blessing associated with spiritual adulthood. So when you reach spiritual adulthood, guess what? You're standing in the gap, but you are blessed in spite of what's going on because of your spiritual growth. Here are the spiritual blessings. There's spiritual blessings in relationship to the individual, that's you, and spiritual blessing in relationship to history. Here it is. Here are the 4. Spiritual blessings. You have spiritual blessings as a spiritual adult, even in times of disaster. Spiritual blessing, you're occupied with Christ. You share the happiness of God. You have capacity for life and capacity for love. You have capacity for happiness. You have capacity for blessing. You have capacity for understanding God's plan. You have capacity for appreciating God's plan. You have capacity for historical development as it occurs. You appreciating the development of history as it occurs. You appreciate the realities of historical failure. In other words, what happens, you don't appreciate the failure, but you appreciate the realities of a historical disaster. You can identify it. You know it's there. You know it's going to happen. You have an appreciation for that. You have an appreciation for reality. Reality when you face anything in life, whether it's a blessing or disaster. So if you're blessed, guess what? You have an appreciation. That's reality. If things are falling apart, you have an appreciation. Why? Because you're a mature believer. The next page. Let's see. Okay. The second blessing is temporal blessings. Temporal blessings. What do we mean by that? Well, let's take a look. Okay. Many of these spiritual adult blessings continue in spite of historical disaster. Hold it now. If you're a spiritual adult, spiritual self-esteem, spiritual autonomy, spiritual maturity, and we've got this historical trend that's going the wrong way. What is this telling you? That as long as you're a spiritual adult, these blessings that we're naming here will continue and will still be yours in spite of the historical disaster. What does that mean? Wealth, success, promotion, advancement in any sphere of life. Social prosperity, establishment prosperity. That means freedom, privacy, property, protection from crime, protection from historical disaster. They're yours during all that. Leadership dynamics, sexual prosperity, professional prosperity, technical prosperity, mental prosperity, cultural prosperity, and military prosperity. What's the third one? Blessing by association. The spiritual adult stands on the right side of history. The principle is obvious. Those who are in your periphery as a spiritual adult are going to be blessed by association with you. Historical blessing. Spiritual adult believers carry their generation in human history. Get that one? Spiritually adult believers carry their generation in human history. Things are going wild out here, but guess what? God's not destroyed the nation, and it has everything to do with who you are. Secondly, spiritual adult believers are stabilizers for all historical generations. Every generation must stand or fall on the basis of spiritually adult remnant. Question, are you a part of that remnant or are you not? Maybe you're just complaining. You're reacting to the historical trend that's going the wrong way. How each generation depends on two things. Let me go back to that last point again. Look at that. Here it is. How each generation goes depends on two things. What are those two things it depends on? How many born-again believers are on the right side of history? How many unbelievers are faithful to the 5 laws of divine establishment? So going back to something you said earlier, Steve, see, an unbeliever can be standing on the right side of history in this sense. What they're doing is, even an unbeliever, see, the laws of divine establishment have been given to the entire human race. They're given to the entire human race. Why? To perpetuate human history for the conclusion of the spiritual battle called the angelic conflict. So even the unbeliever here, who's faithful, will perpetuate this country. When you stop and take a look at it, oftentimes you see unbelievers who are more true to this country than are some believers. You see that? Okay, we're out of time. Whoop, look at that, Steve. 35 seconds before time to close. Go ahead and just pray for us, pal.
Father, thank you for this exciting, very applicable study tonight, and help us to realize the importance as born-again believers to function in the proper way, to be a part of that pivot, and to expand in that pivot, maintaining that pivot.
Yes.
And by doing so, even those who are on the outside will be blessed by association, given more time maybe to be born again if they're not, or if they're not spiritual, to become spiritual.
Yes.
Father, we just pray for our leaders, Donald Trump and all the staff and ability. And Father, I do truly believe, like Dr. Jim teaches, this is that short period of time, your grace before judgment you've given us. And so I just pray we'll be bold, like he said, to stand up for the right things in the right way, be a part of the solution rather than the problem. Thank you that in the end, you're in control, and we're all winners and believers in Jesus Christ. In his name we pray. Amen.
Okay, let me see who's here then. Try to see who's on Facebook with us. I have to get up, let me get up here close. Let's see, Dorothy Staggs is on with us from Whitehall, Arkansas. Mary Jo Lamugo from Davao City, Mindanao. Kurt Ressler's with us tonight. Robert Rice from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Sandra Malone from Hot Springs. Mark Martindale, thank you, Mark. Mary Lewis headed out west with her husband Joe. Rocky Chonko from Las Vegas. Christy Booth, God bless you, Christy. Thank you so much. She's in Florida. An ATA friend. Karen Torrance is on from Beebe. Rhoda Pedras is on from Davao City, Mindanao. And happy birthday again, Rhoda. Today is her birthday. Douglas Clark, thank you, Douglas, for being with us. Jennifer Poole's on with us today from Conway. Thank you, Jennifer. Jean Wilson is on with us tonight. Thank you, Jean. Alyssa Armitage, thank you, Alyssa. Arlinda Rojas, thank you, Arlinda. Sue Rigale, sorry if I mispronounced it, thank you. Pardon me, ma'am. Rick Blackwood from Atlanta, Texas. Okay, come on, move up there. Donna Reynolds from Arkadelphia, thank you, Donna. Ram Briones, and thank you all. Thank you for being with us tonight. We're going to close this out. We're going to shut off our stream for